Welcome to this week's episode of the Evolve to Succeed podcast. Our guest this week is Anthony Woodhouse, chairman of Hall Woodhouse, the Dorset-based brewery and pub company. The company was originally formed in 1777, making it one of the country's oldest still trading companies. And in that whole near 250 years, it has been family owned. So much to talk about with Anthony. You know, what does it feel like to be custodian of this family business that's 250 years old? What does it feel like to be part of a company and a business that's going through so many changes in terms of the hospitality sector? And what are his plans and the family's plans for this business going forward? So whether you just are into business or really like a pint down the pub, I'm sure there's going to be something in this episode for you. Let's get on with the show. Welcome, Anthony, to the Evolve to Succeed podcast.
Thank you, Warren.
This seems very apt. This is going to be our 250th episode.
Oh, no, you're
of
making
the podcast.
that up. You're making that
No,
up.
I'm not. It's the 250th episode. Talking to you with a business that's nearly 250 years old. So
Coming up to
it seems very apt.
Mm.
So I suppose we should start off with, what's your very earliest memories of Hall Woodhouse and the family being involved in the business, Anthony?
I think probably, obviously from my father who was working at the business at the time, I cannot remember a time that I wasn't aware of the business and of Badger and our pubs and things like that.
Yeah.
I mean, driving to school, my dad used to drop me off at school and we used to drive past the brewery on the way to school every day. And that's when I was that was preschool, sort of 3, 4, 5. So really from a very, very early stage, you know, it's just in your blood as such.
Brilliant. And when was the first time that you felt a true connection with the business and perhaps this feeling that one day you would be involved with the business in a kind of full-time capacity?
I was never expecting to.
Okay.
I was always incredibly proud of the business and very much part of it and you know felt part of it and everything else. But I had an elder brother who was always going to go into the business.
Okay.
And as far as I was concerned, that was absolutely fine. He inherited the family house and all that sort of stuff as well. From my point of view, I found Dorset quite claustrophobic growing up.
Okay.
I mean, my family's lived here for donkey's years. And it was just my mum knew everyone. And, you know, sort of, and I found it, as I say, quite claustrophobic. And my father was wise enough to know that my brother and I got on incredibly well. But if we were in the same business, we would compete. We couldn't help not. So I was always encouraged to go off and do something else.
Okay.
So I did, and that suited me down to the ground. It suited my brother down to the ground, and I became involved later on as a sort of non-exec director, sitting on the board. And then sort of when I was in my sort of mid-40s and I lived in Bedfordshire and all the rest, I had no intention of coming back down to
Created your own career, your own
successful
path.
And then my brother died very young, aged 48. And the board asked me to come down and help out. So I said, yes. I know. Yeah. So it was which was an interesting discussion actually with my wife.
There must have been clearly difficult and challenging and interesting times to walk through the door at that point.
It was. I mean, the couple of things I was working in at the time were coming to a natural end in terms of my involvement with them. They were up and running and self-sufficient, etc. So I was beginning to look at something else to do, but coming down here, and I remember driving back up after the board had asked me after a couple of weeks, did I want to do this permanently? And I went to, I sat down and I thought, oh God, this is going to be a difficult conversation with my wife. We still had children in school in Bedfordshire. All our friendship groups were up there. Our friends were up there. Her work was up there. And I said, look, I've got a difficult conversation to have. And she knew what was coming and she just laughed. And I went, well, why are you laughing? She said, there's absolutely no way that you can't not do it.
What support?
So, well, absolutely. And it was really hard for her because,
Yeah.
you know, we lived apart then for 18 months. I had to live with my mum for 18 months because,
Okay.
you know, children's schooling and
Yeah.
stuff. And then all the children were leaving home at that time. So she sort of had both the children leaving home,
Yeah.
moving into a new area, and all the rest of it. So, you know, it's all credit to her. I mean, she had to give up far more than I certainly did.
And I suppose that does move on to this kind of aspect around, and I've heard you describe it as you're really feel like you're the custodian of this generation of the family, not just you, but you're custodians of this business for the next generation. And I love that kind of term. And I suppose that it was that need and desire to make sure the business did transfer and continue that brought you down here. You know, how has the business survived since 1777 in family ownership? I mean, maybe we should have a little bit of potted history, I suppose, about how we've got to this stage.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I mean, the stats on family businesses aren't good.
No.
In terms of longevity.
Yeah.
And it's only about 1 in 8, 1 in 9 that remain financially viable through the third generation. And the classic, you know, story is, you know, the entrepreneur, the first generation makes all the money, the playboys and playgirls of the second generation spend all the money, and the third generation end up back where they started. That didn't happen in our business. Now, why? I think probably a combination of reasons. One is, if you think of our business, making beer has the same 4 ingredients that it's had for millennia, so that hasn't changed much. 2, the nature of the business is property. In terms of involvement with property, we own all our own pubs and things like that, which lends itself more to longevity. But I think the really key one, and the lesson that I've really learned looking at our history, and what I preach to sort of the future custodians of the business, is that the majority of the cash generated is reinvested back in the business. And we've just done some analysis on that as to what the percentage are at the moment. But the first thing that sort of the second generation and third generation started doing when they did that is they started buying pubs. So rather than just brewing beer, so we started brewing beer in 1777 and just supplying other people's pubs, we actually started buying pubs. And so that was a reason to reinvest, and it provided a solidity to the business. Now, today, if you think this current year would take cash in of, say, 150 million or whatever, half of that goes to suppliers, as you imagine.
And some probably.
It's about that. And then the next in line is the tax man. We're very heavily taxed, which, you know, is tough. But on the other hand, we're proud to pay our tax. You know, we pay 30-40 million quid's worth of tax. So that runs a pretty good hospital, a few schools or whatever, which is great. And then team comes shortly after that. And actually the amount that goes to shareholders is about 1%.
Okay.
And then you've got 10-12% that actually is reinvested in the business. So out of that slug that could go out to shareholders, the vast majority goes back into the business. And I think that must, and as custodians and shareholders in the business, that's just accepted how we do it.
I was about to say, because even, you know, most families, even if it makes it past the third generation, there's that point at which, I'm going to say, family quarrels, squabbles, that desire to take more out of it than is sustainable might kick in. But I suppose after all of this time, there's a well-trodden path and structure to the business, and the family must grow up understanding that.
Yes, I think that's honestly right, and we work very hard at it. We have 120 shareholders, of which 60
120 shareholders.
Family members. Yes.
Wow.
I actually I have a deck of cards with people's photos on it, so I can try and remember them all. But it's we work hard at it, and with the next generation. And one of the things that we push an awful lot is that we're not just about a financial investment. If we're a financial investment, then the people with a sizable shareholding would take good advice and say, well, look, you want to diversify and all the rest of it. It's far more than that. And because the shareholding's quite diverse, no one has a particularly big share as such,
Yeah.
which helps. And we have a really, really clear sense of purpose. And, I trotted out the whole time, which is to make people's day and enrich our communities from generation to generation. And that is really important to us. And actually the making money bit, we only got to do that in order to do the fun stuff. Yeah. So it's very different. Yeah. And that's, the private ownership and the family ownership model allows you to do that. Yeah. And our team, our guests, hopefully suppliers, and most importantly, our family shareholders really genuinely buy into that. Yeah. So if you think in the current year, we'll be donating not far short of 10% of our profits to local good causes. Now, the shareholders say, well, actually, no, we'll have that 10%, yeah. Thank you very much, but they don't. And they're proud of that, and therefore their bond to the company is far more than any dividend check or anything else. They're proud to be part of that.
And that's remarkable. There's not many businesses that put that much back into society and their community.
Yes and no. I mean, if I'm really honest, then none of this is we do it on the basis of it's the right thing to do. Yeah. But actually, when you're running things like pubs and all the rest of it, if you're doing that, inevitably it benefits you because people say, oh, and they do this. And so, of course you get it back. And very little charity, in my experience, doesn't have a payback of saying that's not why we do it, but that is the reality. If I'm honest about it,
very honest response. I heard
it is particularly given the nature of our business.
Yeah, definitely. And how do you? Because I'm still intrigued about with 120 shareholders, which is phenomenal. Is how do you educate all of them and the generations that are coming through about these core values and these core principles and what the business stands for, so that the problem may not be yours today, but if you're not careful, it's the next generation and the generation after, unless you can pass that value set through, isn't it?
Absolutely right. And as I say, we work hard at it. Now that becomes. There are various stages in the development in a family business. When there's, one or a couple of brothers or whatever, it's all really tight. The downside is if there's any falling out, it's big. Yeah. Then you get into that sort of middle ground where, there's a few cousins. And I think that's quite a difficult one then, because selection of who's part of it, who's not, the balance between shareholder and all that sort of thing, I think is difficult to manage. We have, I would say, the luxury of it being very spread out. So, should I fall out? I haven't done, but should I fall out with anyone? It's not the end of the world. It's a relatively small thing. But we work really hard with the next generation. Really, we've seen a transition over the last 20 years or so. It was slightly primogenitor, if I was honest, tied in with family houses and that sort of stuff. Okay. And me getting involved actually was an opportunity to move away from that. And we very much opened things up. We started having next gen weekends where we got them all down and we would give them training in how to brew a beer, and they had a brew off. Then we gave them hospitality training, their hospitality high five training, and we got them to run the Duchess of Cornwall for a day. That was an utter disaster, but really, really good fun. Coffee training, cocktail training, Sunday lunch master classes. So really educating them what the business was around to sort of build that pride. And again, if we have a natural advantage over a widget producer. Nothing against widgets or widget producers. I don't really know what they are. But from our point of view, to own part of a brewery and be able to take your mates down the pub and give them a discount is actually quite a cool thing to do. It's quite easy to engage with. Yeah. So that really helps us. That helps us as well. But we really do work hard at it. And we try lots of stuff. Some works, some doesn't. It doesn't matter. We just try lots of different stuff. But we do work day in, day out across the whole broad range of the family. Yeah. And it was interesting when we started that, and we invite everyone as they get, 16, 18, whatever, to come and do work experience. And the vast majority do, because we've such a broad-based business. we can give them experience in any particular area. We actually got their parents saying, well, hold on, my children know more about the business than I do. Can we do grown-up work experience? So we had a few of their parents back in.
Back to the factory
floor. Yes,
floor.
absolutely, to find out more about the business and things. But the key, as far as I'm concerned, is working really, really hard at it. You can't force anyone to be loyal. You can't force anyone to have pride in something. All you've got to do is try and create the right environment to maximise the chances
does come
of
back
that.
To having a value set as a company and a business and as an overarching family, isn't it, I suppose?
Very much so.
I'm really interested because obviously a business that's nearly 250 years old comes with a lot of tradition. But actually one of the things when I look at Hall Woodhouse, and we've got some brilliant examples of modern hospitality venues behind us, is that you do innovate, you do change, you do make decisions. So how does the business balance tradition with innovation, Anthony?
I think it's a number of different facets of it. We love our history, but we don't live in our history.
Okay.
We learn from our history, we reflect on our history, and we just know, and everyone's banged into them, that because we've got a rich history doesn't give us any justification or right to a successful future. So we've always got to be forward looking, learn from the lessons from the past and all the rest of it, but we've always got to be forward looking. And if you actually look back through our history, there are stages of entrepreneurship all the way through.
Okay.
Our founder, for instance, he was an entrepreneur, he was a farmer, thought, well, hold on, how can I add value to the barley I was growing? I'll malt it and turn it into beer. Why wouldn't you? But then as the Napoleonic Wars were beginning to loom large, taxes on beers went up. So he actually said, well, hold on, there might be an opportunity here, because there's a whole lot of troops based down on Weymouth, 15,000 of them, training, whatever. And part of their daily ration was 5 pints of beer a day.
5 pints a
five
day.
pints. It was small beer, relatively low alcohol. And Charles Hall, the founder, said, well, hold on, 15,000 bored young men who get the first 5 pints free. This is an opportunity. And he got the license to supply the troops. So you can see that entrepreneurship that goes on down through. So it's a mindset. And it is just so tempting to, we've always done it that way. And therefore it's always going to work. And that we are really rigorous. I mean, one of the ways I think that we do it, if you look at our board, then we have three parts to the board. And I think this is fundamental to maximizing the chances of us prospering going forward. We have the family stewards, the three family members on it, who are not there. They may be involved with running the business, but it's just because it doesn't mean that we don't think of ourselves as a family-run business. We think of it as a family-stewarded business.
Okay.
Now, the individual family member may be involved with running it, but it doesn't have to be like that. Okay. Then we look at employing the best people in our industry. So our executive team at the moment on the board, none happen to be family members. Now, hopefully there will be, some of them will be in the future. So absolutely no glass ceilings whatsoever. We treat them as family in the terms of the board.
Because that can be an issue, can't it? Because people in a family business talent can feel suppressed, can't it?
I think so, and I could not be involved. I could not imagine being involved in a business where you had to have the right name to be on the board.
Yeah.
Now, clearly, I wouldn't have got involved in the way that I did and all the rest of it if I hadn't had the name that I had, but it's not to the exclusion of other people. Yeah. And then the third part of the structure is we have independent non-execs who are literally giants within our industry. And they are constantly challenging us, and that's what we look from them. So that board is a really, I mean, it's a fun, but really challenging place. So we're never, ever, ever rest on our laurels. It's just, what the world's moving too fast. I mean, it really is. So we have to continually change. I would say it's in our DNA, but obviously we structure it to maximize the chances going forward.
Yeah, because that ability to innovate and change and not just do the same old, same old. I mean, I remember I grew up in Wimborne, so I'm a local lad, and I remember the, I'm going to call them candy pops or soda pops.
Panda Pops. Yes.
Panda Pops, that was it, growing up. But that was a big part of your business for a long time.
It was, yeah. I mean, we Panda Pops had a quarter of the children's soft drink market in the UK, so it was a massive brand, all produced in Blandford here. Yeah. We even made the little plastic bottles.
Okay.
So millions and millions and millions of them every year. Now, we came out of that business, and one of the driving forces behind that was we stopped feeding Panda Pots to our own children. And we felt it was morally wrong to make money out of a business where we weren't willing to feed the product to our own children. I hasten to add, we don't feed them badger.
I was just about to ask that.
Until they're at least 5, but that's a different matter. But and the reason was on that you didn't get those those amazing colours of green, red, blue with natural ingredients. It was all through numbers and all the rest of it. And we were beginning to wake up to the fact that,
you did that very early on, didn't you?
Yeah,
in terms of that kind of trend.
Mid 2000s. Yeah. And, so we were still making money and all the rest of it. But with that in the back of our mind, we said, well, hold on, this can't be right. Yeah. Now, clearly, if we were beginning to think like that, other people started to as well. Yeah. So, someone paid us good money to buy it, and it was a tough decision. We had to make 220 people redundant in Blandford. But because we did it in a boom time when things were going well, it was much easier to help people find employment and things like that. But, we believe that the right moral decisions turn into the right commercial decisions. And that was, a good case in point that it did, because Panda just doesn't exist anymore, sadly.
A very quick break from this week's episode, which I hope you're enjoying. If you are enjoying, please remember, do help us and help yourself to make sure you don't miss an episode by subscribing and reviewing the episode. So that's it. Short interlude from me. Let's get back to the conversation. We should go on really and talk about the hospitality sector generally. Clearly, you are changing, you're innovating, but, there's quite a lot of headwinds for the hospitality sector right now in the UK. And there probably has been in the last 3 or 4 years.
Yes.
How is the business addressing those headwinds, and how are you making yourselves stand out from the crowd?
I think there are 2 types of headwind. There's what I would call structural headwinds, which are driven by trend. So that's permanent change.
Okay.
So if you think of the old traditional boozers where smoking was a big part of it, there was a structural change that came about by people smoking less, and then it became a ban and all the rest of it. But that was just an acceleration of a trend. So there's those structural headwinds, which any business faces. And actually, if you moan too much about the structural headwinds, well, actually, you're not innovating, you're not changing. So there's that side.
You're just being a dinosaur, aren't you, at that point?
Precisely, yeah. And the huge danger, I think, in any industry that knows each other very well is you end up getting together and polishing each other's dinosaurs, which is not constructive. It doesn't go well. And then the other headwinds are what I'd call sort of more short-term playing field ones, where like a sort of a biased ref or something like that, we get a lot of regulatory issues. So, I mean, national insurance, for instance, going up in the way that it did, as a people-heavy business, which we're proud to be, that alone cost us somewhere between £1 million and £1.5 million. And now there's no even indirect benefit of that.
No.
We're happy to pay the real living wage, and proud to, which is unusual in our industry. But by paying more, you would hope that you would get better, better quality of team member who works harder and all the rest of it. So you can see a benefit from that. But a tax coming totally left field on employment,
on top,
which is hard. So there is those 2 types of headwinds. And, the tactical ones you can moan about a bit, but you just got to sort of,
you've got to find your way through.
You do. And then the structural ones, you just got to think about your business. Now, if you think, of the consumption of alcohol, how people socialize, what time of day they socialize, who's catered for, who's not catered for. So to give you an example, 30 years ago, would you have known what a latte was or a cappuccino? And, you wouldn't have had people going into Greg's and asking for a macchiato, or you just wouldn't have
And you definitely wouldn't have gone down your local pub.
No, and frankly, if you'd gone in at 10 o'clock in the morning, one, someone would have thought you're an alcoholic, and two, the coffee would have been crap. So we've basically, pubs are socializing venues, and what we have to do is make them as attractive as possible to as many people as possible for the times of day that they want to socialize, and then provide the right fuel for that socializing at the right time. So that could be coffee, it's food, it could be beer, it could be cocktails, it could be all those different things, it could be accommodation, all those different things. So you've got to react to that structural change. And, we, just to give you an example of the extent of the change, we had about 260 pubs in 2000, in the year 2000. We've probably sold somewhere between a half and 2/3 of those. Now, am I proud that we've sold them? Of course not, because a lot of them my dad would have bought or built or whatever, my great-grandfather, whatever. But the reality is we use pubs differently. And so, the male-orientated boozer is not that much in demand, and it's not part of our business going forward. We're reinvesting, coming back to that thing, all the money from selling it hasn't been paid to shareholders, been reinvesting in businesses into much bigger businesses that cater for a broad range of occasions, with a broad range of different fuels and things for guests, so that now in some of the big new ones we build, over 50% will be women visiting, which is, sort of from the traditional caricature or a stereotype of a pub is very, very, very different, which is great. It's great. And obviously food has been a big, my father started putting food back in our pubs in the 1960s in form of steakhouses, just as Bernie Inn and all the rest were starting it. So he was innovating and changing and reacting to that structural change even then in the 60s.
And how important is the beer and the beverage side to the business now compared to the
emotionally vital, commercially not that vital. So for us, brewing is where it started, and brewing and beer and Badger is the sort of golden thread that links it all together. And if you ask any of my family what they own a piece of, they'll say a brewery, as opposed to a pub company. Does quite it's integrate, and it's the thing that binds it all together. It is. So, and commercially, obviously we brew the beer and sell the beer and all the rest of it. But and I think it gives our pubs an identity, because it's somehow the pub is linked to the brewery as opposed to the chain. And I hate the word chain. If you look at our pubs, you can't possibly say
I haven't used that.
I'll tell you off. Because a chain feels cookie cutter, everything identical. It does. And somehow linked to a brewery has a sort of an emotion, more of an emotional attachment, I think, which hopefully would help us with our guests, whether they want to have a beer there or not.
And in terms of the, beer itself as a product, as a commodity, has gone through huge change, hasn't it? From very traditional beers becoming sort of out of fashion to lagers, to them to more craft beers, now back more to cask and keg kind of beers and ales. How do you, when you are the beer company, how do you manage that process?
Well, it's, I think, again, it's reacting to structural change. So if you're set up with a whole lot of male-orientated beer boozers just selling beer, then you're very exposed to change. Now, if you think beer consumption in this country peaked in 1979, since that date, beer sales have probably fallen between 40 and 50%. They've roughly halved. And also what has happened is the amount that is drunk in pubs has gone from 90% down to 50%. So if you imagine those two put together, the amount drunk in pubs is totally different. So you have to react to that. So there's the long-term trend in terms of drinking beer, or whether it's lager, or there's it's a spectrum. But there are also some very big trends going on within the beer thing. You mentioned the move to lager. There is also now there's cask ale, which is beer as God intended it, and then there's keg ale, where it's filtered and it has gas put in it as well, and that's become very, very popular, particularly with much stronger flavors and hops and trends along that thing. So we've had to react to that, and so we've launched a new brand in the keg sort of craft market to fit that. But any business changes what they do, So it's saying now we're passionate about cask ale, because as I say, it's beer as God intended it. These things go in fashion. Interesting, cask ale is very difficult to look after, and it's a live product in the barrel. So we're ferocious about maintaining quality. We don't sell our beer to anyone else because we just then risk them not looking after it properly. And we hope it gives us a point of difference. So we will be defending cask ale, but we'll be defending cask ale having built another brand as well.
Gotten a position in the
absolutely
what now is perhaps the more core market.
Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah,
and in terms of your role within the family, your role as chairman, what legacy do you want to leave on the business?
I think it's having created or being continuing and building on an environment that allows really talented people to excel, and which allows us to have a successful business that is a force for good. Now, that's not just a snapshot, because actually the real judge of that is halfway through the next generation. Because if we had positioned it in the wrong place, then that would be wrong. So you'll have to knock on my grave in 30 years' time to see whether it's a genuine legacy. Because I think, if you think of football managers, and I won't mention the individual, but you'll be able to guess the individual. Some people have been incredibly successful, but the whole club has fallen apart afterwards. Now, that is not an option. No. I would have failed if that's thing. And coming back to the thing, I don't think of myself as running the business. I'm not. We have a MD in the business now who's absolutely fantastic. He's definitely running the business as such. My job is to create that environment that allows him to do that, and to really excel. Which he is doing things. So legacy is a fairly lagged thing to think about. But I think
it must be important for you, that legacy piece, because it's like is the business under family ownership in when you're 30 years in your grave must feel important to you, Anthony.
Totally and utterly. And I mean the flip negative side of that. When we locked the door, we closed all our pubs a couple of days before lockdown because we just didn't know whether our teams were safe. So we had closed our pubs. Walking out of the door here, effectively locking the door of the office and sitting in my car in the car park, looking up at the branding saying 1777, think, God, is it on my watch that it's come to an end? That's quite a lot. That was hard. It lasted about 15 minutes. Then I went over and saw the brewery guys, and one of the huge draymen came up and punched fists with me, said, "Go on, Anthony, you can do it," sort of thing. So that became easy. So absolutely, but it's making sure that I've always viewed my when I got involved, I didn't know how to run a pub, I didn't know how to brew a beer. it was all about creating this environment and making sure that we had a strategy in place that was forward looking. And my role, I was managing director for 10 years or whatever, but it was all, I was like a sort of amorphous sort of being that as people grew, my role gets less. Yeah. So therefore I didn't move on from being managing director when I was ready, or before or after I was ready. It was when the next person was ready. Yeah. And that's you've got to put your ego to one side and all the rest of it, and actually think about, no, that it really doesn't. You don't matter. No one person matters at all. It's just about creating the next person to do it, a next person. And our MD is brilliant at that as well, and our forebears have been the same. And I think the dangers with family-owned / run businesses, people cling on too long because they just can't let go. Yeah. And you've got to trust,
especially in those early generations. Yeah. You see it, don't you? You see, mum, dad, or the founders really clinging on to the last moment, really, to pass it on. And
I think it is, and it's unfair on everyone. That we all like to think we're absolutely invaluable, but reality is we ain't. And actually, if you start with that mindset, it's much easier for it to be an evolution rather than anything else. I mean, my cousin's just retiring after 44 years. And I'm going to tease him by the fact that it's the third level of his retirement. I think it's being like this, but it's just that gentle evolution over time, meeting the individual's needs, but most importantly the company's needs. Yeah.
And it is about having a lot of this conversation. What I'm hearing, and it's about having a plan, isn't it? And that whether you're a family business or just an entrepreneurial owner-managed business.
Well, as soon as I got involved, we were then looking at the next succession. Yeah. So actually, we've got an important family succession bit coming up this May, because my cousin's retiring. He and I are the past it generation. We're seventh generation, and the eighth generation are now the now generation. Yeah. So that we're appointing a new family director. She's age 35, and then we have this role, which is a next gen family role, which is a training role on the board, and we're appointing new ones. So you can just feel the shift in the things, but it's all planned.
Like an escalator, bringing them through.
It's all planned out, and there's another family member who works with it within the business as such. And then on the executive side, again, we've had a very settled senior team, and we've just altered that a bit to create more space, because otherwise that senior team, who are great, we want to keep, but if that's the same for too long, then you've got people bumping against it. So we're just reallocating and reorganizing things internally a bit to give more space and more opportunity for people to grow and excel.
See the next thing.
So it's across the whole board that we're permanently thinking about that.
I'm going to have to refer to my cards, because your MD, Matt Kersey, came out with a great quote recently, and I think it was as you'd won the 2025 award for Best Managed Pub Company. So congratulations.
Thank you.
Feels a bit harsh to quote to him and ask you a question on it. But his quote was that he felt that the business had now successfully weathered the storm. I assume that was a reference to the pandemic and everything that came after. But he stated that you'd successfully weathered the storm, and that mindset now needed to change to a renewed sense of determination and ambition. Mm-hmm. How does that show up in the business day in, day out? And if I went and spoke to the team out there, would they resonate with that?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think always a danger. You have a good run. We've had a good run we've gone through recovery into really driving the business forward. And you don't survive for 250 years, and you're not going to survive for another 250 years if you think your job's done when you've done that. Actually, it's a bit like, the kids' football team at halftime, they're 6-0 up, and you tell them, look, it's 0-0, you've got to start again. And that's the reality of it, because you may be at that position, but that can erode so quickly. Yeah. So actually, you just got to start again. It's that mindset, again, coming back to innovation doesn't happen by chance. You've got to be lucky, with your innovation, but actually you've got to keep pushing it. And, Matt is really, really, clear and quite rightly about that, okay, we've done fine, but that's done now. Let's
we
celebrate
now need
that, which we did.
determination and ambition to go again.
Now we've got to go again.
Yeah.
And it's as simple as that, really.
Brilliant. Fantastic. Are you ready for some quick fire questions?
Yes.
So here we go. What's your favourite Badger beer?
That's like choosing a favourite child.
I know.
Honestly, it depends on the occasion. I would say my go-to beer would be Thirsty Ferret, which is a lovely sort of malty cask ale. Traditionally, I didn't really like too hoppier beers. I think that's because I've grown up with our beers, which weren't too hoppy. But actually, this last summer in our craft range, we've got an IPA, a hazy IPA, which is not too hoppy. It's not too alcoholic, just a hint of sweetness. And honestly, on a hot sunny day, it is just so refreshing. You know, it's that much colder, and because it's from keg rather than cask. So those two sort of fight it out. Special treat, obviously, would be Tanglefoot, which that won the best beer in the world in 1987. I mean, it's a very famous brand, but you know, that's my sort of treat beer, really. But those two would be the ones that. And interesting, I've never liked stout. I've always found it quite acrid. Yeah. And anyway, we've just launched our own stout that's just doing brilliantly, and obviously I had to taste it.
Stout's having a renaissance, isn't it?
It is. It is, and you know, all credit to the brand leader in that. But there's some stories I'll tell about that, but I better not. And we've launched our own stout, and actually taken Guinness out of all our managed houses now.
Okay.
And our business partners who have a choice between Guinness and our stout are actually also going to the stout. But it's delicious, and it's not as
I have had a pint of it, and
it's just a little bit smoother, and it's delicious. So that's sort of coming up the outside lane as well. Sorry, it wasn't a very quick fire answer there.
It was a good answer there. So this one may be quicker. Pub garden or fireside snug?
Fireside snug.
Cool. Your favourite pub? So I've asked you to choose your favourite child with the beer.
Again, it depends on the occasion. My local is the Duchess of Cornwall. I live just on the outskirts of Dorchester. I tend to go there every Saturday mornings. It's a lovely setting. You can people watch, great coffee, breakfast, pastries, and read the paper. Good
example of what the venues are now, isn't
absolutely.
it?
Absolutely. So that would be that. On a sort of now a Thursday evening rather than a Friday evening, the Chip and Shovel in London is the only pub in two halves in London, either side of a sort of alleyway, and there's a tunnel underneath that we built just between Charing Cross and Embankment. And the buzz there on a an evening to having a drink is fabulous. And then sort of a family multi-generational, because I've got tons of grandchildren, going to the Smugglers down on by Osmington Mills near Weymouth is just a fabulous setting on the Jurassic coast. It's all you could possibly want from a destination pub. Lovely big garden, one stream running through it, oldie woldy building. I mean, it's every generation love it, whether you're taking the grandparent or the grandchild. It works. It's just a classic.
Perfect
so
venue.
those if I had to pick three.
I'm going to go a bit serious now with some of these quick fire questions. So most valuable piece of advice that you've ever received?
I think one of my previous careers was investment banking.
Okay.
Which was great fun and all the rest of it. But I had my sort of who I viewed as my mentor there was an old school banker who seemed a little bit out of place in the sort of high energy, high octane sort of end of 80s, 90s investment banking world. And he, as far as he was concerned, values and integrity and all the rest of it were absolutely fundamental to a person's being, and also for a business. And to see him uphold that in that environment had a very profound effect on me. Yeah. He was a remarkable man that I really admired. His name was John Rock, but he really was a rock in a rushing stream, if you see what I mean. And he was just so strong on it that he was respected by everyone.
Funny, I've got two people in my background and career that I would just remember in the same way, is that they were just had strong values, strong integrity. Yeah. And it had and it always will have that everlasting.
Yes, and I think it was just the juxtaposition of that world and him
at that time,
and all the rest of it was, it was that was very fundamental to me.
I'm gonna have to ask a new one now. Investment banking, or chairman of the family business.
Oh, that's easy. Investment banking was incredible fun and obviously very remunerative. You're working with incredibly bright people. You see the deals that you're working on the front pages, brilliant. But frankly, it turned me into a right tosser. But it was great. I then went across to the voluntary sector and worked as a volunteer, which I could do because of what went before. Wealth creation that happened. So working principally with homelessness and kids cricket, which was sort of rediscovered my sense of self-worth, really. And then coming here is the happy medium, because I missed the value side, the real purpose of life. The other, I loved it for what you were doing and all the rest of it, but I missed capitalism because I love the thing. And actually a family business is, you've got an opportunity to bridge that, because comes back to my point about the balance between a successful business and being a force for good. And as a family business, it just works perfectly for me.
Brilliant. Great way to end our conversation, but I always end with one final question on the podcast. What's your personal, not the business, what's your personal definition of success, Anthony?
I think it's just doing the best that you possibly could have done in that particular environment or whatever, given your skills, experience and all the rest of it. Leave no stone unturned to do that, and just hopefully leave whatever you touch, whatever you're involved with, just a little bit better for you having been involved. I think that would be my definition of success.
Brilliant, thank you. If people want to know more about Hall Woodhouse, go and find out where the local Hall Woodhouse pub is if they don't know already.
Or come here and I'd give them a tour.
Where do they need to go?
Our website, or book in tours here or whatever, or contact me direct and bring a party along, and I'll talk forever about it. Yeah.
Brilliant. I've loved your belief and your passion in the business and that insight you've given us, Anthony. Thank you for being an incredible guest on the Evolve to Succeed podcast.
Thank you very much, Warren. Glad to be the 250th.
So this actually marks the milestone of our 250th episode of the Evolve to Succeed podcast. So what an occasion to interview Anthony about a business that's nearly 250 years old. And what an insight we got from Anthony on what it feels like to be custodian of such a well-established family business, what it's like right now in the hospitality sector, and some of his future plans and ideas for the business going forward. I really hope you've enjoyed that episode of the Evolve to Succeed podcast, and if so, help us by reviewing and subscribing to the podcast. And of course, if you want to know more about Evolve, then go to evolveadvisory.co.uk. See you next time on the Evolve to Succeed podcast.